you very much, and it's a great pleasure and privilege to be joined by Peter Goadsby to talk about migraine and the work that he's doing to help people with this incredibly debilitating condition. The reason I'm so passionate about this is because I'm a migraine sufferer myself. It's something that I've been dealing with for around 4 years in this most intense phase, and I suffer from migraines roughly 2 or 3 times a week. I haven't yet found anything that has actually prevented them from occurring, and the only way I can cope with it is by taking prescription medication, and in the job that I'm in, it's pretty hard to take time off, and I know that's the case for so many other people. So dealing with this condition at work, I think, is a really important issue, and we know it affects so many people, and I'm very lucky to have Sir Peter here to answer some questions for me. Sir Peter is an internationally renowned neurologist in the field of headache and migraine, and he's Professor of Neurology at King's College London Institute of Psychiatry, Psychology and Neuroscience, and Director at the National Institute for Health Research Wellcome Trust Clinical Research Facility at King's College Hospital. And he's dedicated his whole career to helping people with migraine. And he's recently been awarded the Brain Prize for his pioneering migraine research that led to the development of the first preventative treatment for migraine. And this is a monoclonal antibody treatment that significantly improved the quality of life for many people with migraine who say that they feel that they've been given their life back. And that's certainly something that I can completely relate to, because it is something that takes over your entire life and it's very hard to focus on anything else. I would really like to ask Peter right now to just introduce himself and tell everybody about the work that he's doing.
Hi, well, it's a privilege to speak to you. The work that you do, of course, I mean, in Parliament. So, and to take an interest in this is a particular privilege. I don't really recognise who you just introduced, but it's very generous. Thank you very much. I've been interested in migraine, as you say, all my professional career. I was directed into it at the start, and my interest has been in trying to understand the condition better, because I think biology and understanding is a way to remove ignorance and prejudice. Along with that, biology and understanding generates targets for treatments, and as you say, we've recently been fortunate that one of those targets has evolved into a new form of therapy for migraine. I think the particular strength of certainly my research activity in recent years has been the ability to be involved in and leverage the investment that the NHS has made in the NIHR, the National Institute of Health Research. It's just a beacon for how to get things from the bench to the bedside. Great investment.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I really don't think you need to be at all modest, Professor Goadsby, because, you know, and I know from my experiences and those of many others that it really is such a life-changing disease, and the way that you have found and you're working so hard to help people with something that's such a hidden illness, actually, and there's so much stigma attached to it still, that I think that the fact that someone who has got the experience and the expertise that you have has chosen to focus on this particular illness rather than many of the others that perhaps got more attention in the public eye, it is just something that's massively welcome. I mean, perhaps you can tell us a bit about why do you think people actually get migraine?
For most people, the reason they get migraine is very simply poor parental choice, in the sense that it's inherited. That the potential is inherited on a genetic basis. So you bring to the party, you might say, your genes, and then circumstances will turn them on. So I think that cause, I think, is the underlying genetics. Then, of course, there's what you do in your life to and what happens to you to trigger things off and change that genetics. Yeah,
that's a shame. There's not much any of us can do to reverse that. Is there?
No, not that we've worked out. So it is what it is. But I mean, I say it that way. Not it might sound silly, but I think very often people with migraine are almost blamed for the problem, almost blamed for having it. They're blamed or stigmatized for the fact that they have an attack on a day or can't do anything in particular. And I'm not suggesting that there's no role for people to have to try and improve their own problem. But at the core, you can't blame a person if they've got, you know, grey hair. It is what it is, and you can't blame people for having migraine. That just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So many people will be listening to that and probably be kind of cheering because they will agree with that.
Well, they've been blamed. People look at them as though they're sort of crazy. And the other problem with this is that because it doesn't leave a scar apart from the scar of losing time, which you never get back. I mean, it doesn't kill you, but it ruins days. You have a scan, you look at a person with migraine, I look at you and you look normal, as normal as anyone you'd see on the bus. But I mean, that's the thing that you can't tell. You get on a bus, 1 in 3 adult females on the bus have had migraine in the previous 12 months. You can't tell who they are. They're the person who's working in Tesco. They're the person who's a nurse who's looking after you. They're your mum. They're your sister. They're your MP. It doesn't respect. It doesn't respect anyone's position. It simply grabs them and ruins part of their life.
Yeah, that's completely right. And I am being in the sort of job that I'm in, I do sort of look at Facebook and so on, and I'm part of a number of migraine support groups, and I tend to just not really post myself, but just read them. And it is quite hard to see how many people throughout the pandemic have been frontline healthcare workers, going to work with migraine, coronavirus wards, and having to wear everything, the full PPE, be hot, stressed, not having time for rest or a drink. And honestly, that puts into perspective my own suffering, because I just think, you know, the way that people have had to cope with that, and have done even before the pandemic. But as you rightly say, it is so hidden and so badly understood, because often even if you do talk to people, if they haven't had the experience themselves, they don't know what it's like, and they'll just suggest that you have to drink some water or take an aspirin. It's kindly meant, of course, it's kindly meant, but it's not what's really going to help. I mean, can you just talk for our viewers, what actually happens to the body during a migraine attack? Because it's so much more than just head pain, isn't it?
At its core, what happens in a migraine attack is the brain's ability to ignore things that it needs to ignore doesn't work. So we're all getting information, what's called sensory information, light, sound. People will be listening or hearing this. I'm moving my head about. I'm wearing clothes, fortunately. So that's all normal. But in a migraine, the same light that you have now, the same sound would seem unpleasant. Light, sensitive to light, sensitive to sound. A normal throbbing vessel, because everyone's throbbing, that's just the way it works, that's because you're alive. It's painful. The touching of the head, which is normally fine, touching whatever, is uncomfortable, something called, that's a fancy term called allodynia. So the essence of the way the brain works, well, an important aspect of it in this respect, is we ignore things. We ignore things aren't important at the time. We ignore our clothes, we ignore the lights, and it's just bubbling along in the background. And that allows us to have attention to the things we're interested in. Those mechanisms are completely disorganized during migraine. So it's no wonder that a person with migraine has a brain fog. It's hard. You can't concentrate on something if you can't get rid of the rest of the signals. And it's that disorganization within the brain of incoming information that produces the pain and light and sound sensitivity, and this general clouding and dysfunction in the way the brain's working. I mean, it's impossible to expect someone to function normally when all of these mechanisms are not working during migraine.
Yeah, no, that's a really good description of it. And of course, your research is focused on a really new groundbreaking treatment. Can you tell us a bit more about that and how it works?
Yes, well, I've been interested for a long time. Lars Edvinsson and I, a Swedish collaborator, first showed a few too many years ago than I care to say, that a small chemical called calcitonin gene-related peptide, or CGRP, easier to remember, is increased and involved in migraine. And we predicted that if you blocked it, that would improve, that would control some people with migraine. And it turns out that if you block the effect of this CGRP, you can stop migraines. You can use it as a preventive. So there are what's called monoclonal antibodies. They're developed so that they're very specific, which is the fantastic thing about them. They just affect this CGRP pathway, and when they're administered, they can very significantly reduce the frequency and severity of migraine with very few side effects. Because the fantastic thing about this development, well, I shouldn't say it in that way, it is fantastic, is the focus on a particular pathway. We understood the pathway, developed the medicines get developed, and it focuses on the pathway, so you don't get all these other side effect problems. Most people listening who've been on a preventive would have had the discussion about weight gain or tiredness or exercise problems or cognitive problems or problems with even the hair falling out. All sorts of range of unpleasant side effects happening on the previous medicines, because they were not designed for migraine. So when you get a migraine designer drug and it works and it works without a penalty. So you don't, it's bad enough living with migraine. Living with a treatment that gives you a side effect, that's like, what is that? That's not so, to deal with the devil. But if you have a treatment that blocks the attacks and then you don't pay a penalty for that, well, I think that's the cool thing about it. And that's the way NICE saw it. So it's evolved.
It's amazing, and you're right to talk about all those side effects. And one of the things about living with migraine is that constant anxiety that even if you haven't got one on a given day, you're anxious about getting one or putting yourself in a position where you're going to get one. So having this fear of these side effects is just another burden that you've got to live with, which it's a
crazy thing. I can imagine in your position, you've got stuff to do. People expect you to be there. If the camera goes on when you're in the House of Commons, you have to be 100%, because people just they're going to diss you if you're not. And that happens week in and week out. And the person who has to turn up to work and whatever job that you're doing, people kind of just expect normality. And that's a lot of pressure, not to mention the social pressure, family getting sick of, missing out on things. And they don't mean getting sick, but it's hard. These things are very, very difficult.
Yeah, it has such a big impact on not only the individual, but the family as well. And I know that's true. I'm very lucky to have a supportive family, but even then, I don't always want to tell them when I've got a migraine, because it's just so boring.
I think people. I talk to a lot of people with migraine, and I think it can be very difficult for them, because a year in and year out, just saying the same thing to their partner, they just think, I don't want to do that. I'm kind of sick of it. I think people you don't want to say it, and no one wants to hear it. It's a very silent, unpleasant thing to have when you have to kind of burden the whole lot of it inside.
Yeah, and I think it does make your life feel very small at times, because it's that fear of actually planning anything, because if you don't want to plan anything, because you might get a migraine and have you got your pills and you won't enjoy it anyway, so what's the point? You'd rather just so I know that you sympathize with that. But just if I may finish just by talking about the treatment. So I know it's been approved, but when do you think that people actually watching this film will be able to go to their doctor and here in the UK and start to request that?
Oh, well, the many of the clinics involved in headache have started that. The first of the medicines was approved some months ago. I mean, in the last 12 months, everything seems like yesterday, because it's the same. But some months ago, the latest ones are just coming online. So there's virtually things are happening now. It's complex in post-COVID world, because, or the, dare I say, peri-post-COVID world, without saying more than that, because you've got competing resource interest and so forth. But yeah, effectively they're approved and things are being rolled out. So if people have migraine and need to think about therapy, now would be a good time. I mean, I think the message is that if you've got migraine and you've tried preventive and you think everything's rubbish and it doesn't work, you may well be right. But that doesn't mean that it won't work tomorrow. Well, what's fantastic about research, that's what's exciting about it, is there is a tomorrow. These things are available. It's time to, if you haven't had a bad time, go and ask, because the change has come. And I can tell you there are other things coming along.
Really?
It's very rich. I mean, I can imagine the look on the nice people's face, but there are other things coming along, small molecule tablet drugs that will do the same thing as the injections, these monoclonal antibodies, both treatments for attacks and treatments for prevention. We're about to enter a phase where over the next couple of years, several new treatments will come. So for the person who's sitting at home, barely able to see this because they're too sensitive to light and finding my voice unsurprisingly unpleasant, the message, the soft message is it's going to get better. So be optimistic. That's
such a great message of hope. And I really hope that people, even if they're suffering right now, can take your very soothing voice and see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Very generous.
Professor Goadsby, thank you so much for taking up so much of your time to speak to you today. And I'm really grateful, and I want to thank you and all your colleagues that are involved in this work. And I know that there will be many people who are not able to speak in the way that I am, but are incredibly grateful. So thank you so much.
Thank you.